Sane versus insane progress. Here are the key points I'll be making. How we define and measure progress determines our behavior and what kind of a world we are leaving our grandchildren and other species. Hoping for perpetual progress via techno-fix solutions fosters complacency instead of responsible ProFuture actions. Problems caused by economic growth and development will not be solved by more of the same. Indeed, our predicament will worsen. Understanding ecology, energy, and history undermines expectations that human ingenuity, technology, or the market can save industrial civilization. This is Michael Dowd speaking. Two of my great mentors are William Catton, author of Overshoot, and Thomas Berry. William Catton wrote, "Human society is inextricably part of a global biotic community, and in that community, human dominance has had and is having self-destructive consequences." Thomas Berry considered himself a geologian, not a theologian, but a geologian. He wrote The Dream of the Earth and The Great Work, Our Way into the Future, and other books. He was one of the most significant ecological and evolutionary thinkers of the 20th century, and many of us consider William Catton's book, Overshoot, to be the most important book we've ever read in our lives, and many also consider it the most important book of the 20th century. Connie and I both feel that way. Thomas Berry wrote, "The most difficult transition to make is from a human-centered to a life-centered norm of progress. If there is to be any true progress, the entire life community must progress. Any so-called progress of the human at the expense of the larger life community must ultimately lead to a diminishment of human life itself." So there are many prophets of progress, this idea that progress is undeniable. Steven Pinker, of course, his book Enlightenment Now, bestseller. Matt Ridley, The Rational Optimist. Peter Diamandis, Abundance, The Future is Better Than You Think. And Hans Rosling, Factfulness, 10 Reasons Why We're Wrong About the World and Why Things Are Better Than You Think. Now, these are not just great people and great writers, but these are best-selling books, as are some of the techno-optimists, all coming from this place that progress is undeniable. It's obvious. And yet there's also just as heavyweight, major, respected thinkers that have written that progress is a short-term, fossil-fueled illusion. Christopher Lasch, his classic book, The True and Only Heaven, Progress and Its Critics. John Gray has written a number of books, Heresies Against Progress and Other Illusions. Also The Silence of Animals, on progress and other modern myths, in his book Straw Dogs. Ronald Wright, the Canadian, wrote A Short History of Progress. And Chris Hedges, The World as It Is, Dispatches on the Myth of Human Progress. And other authors that aren't as well known, but have written scathing attacks, critiques of this idea of human-centered progress that doesn't factor in the well-being of primary reality, everything we depend on. In fact, John Michael Greer, the two books on the right, is Connie's and my favorite author. We've read about 14 of his books in the last 5 years. So, is progress an obvious reality, or is progress a fossil-fueled illusion? And why does it matter? Well, I suggest it's both. But what's really important is what is progressing and what is declining. We need to look at that. And who defines progress, the present or the future? Progress can be defined and measured in ways that are sane or insane, good or evil, pro-future or anti-future, sustainable or unsustainable. For example, I suggest to you that the fact that golf clubs are cheaper, that there's more golf courses, that there's less violence among golfers than any time in human history, that there's less violence between golfers and the public, and so on, that they have better pension plans than they used to have. These are all human-centered measures of progress. But if we're not paying attention to primary reality and the impact of that, we've got an insane understanding of progress. A dear colleague, Nate Hagans, teaches a course at the University of Minnesota called Reality 101, and he has this chart, this trophic cascade. It's really how energy in a system, this is basic Ecology 101 and Energy 101, that everything feeds on sunlight, that ultimately plants feed directly on the sunlight, the herbivores feed on the plants, the carnivores feed on the herbivores, and this doesn't mean that the top carnivores are top of the dog or the best. It means they're the most vulnerable. because anything that they depend upon causes them problems. This also ought to be considered History 101, because when you understand this, you can understand why we have dozens and dozens of examples of the rise and fall of unsustainable civilizations. I consider this overshoot studies. Again, William Catton's book Overshoot, many people consider the most important book of the 20th century, and Connie and I both consider it the most important book we've ever read in our lives. John Perlin's book, A Forest Journey, the story of wood and civilization. It's a classic because he talks about over and over again civilizations. Again, the primary source of energy until the 1800s or late 1700s was wood. Human and animal muscle power and forests, wood. And so we see over and over again how forests were wiped out and civilizations collapsed. Walter Youngquist's classic 1997 book, Geodestinies, The Inevitable Control of Earth Resources Over Nations and Individuals. A book's so important that I'm working with a group of people to issue a revised edition. He worked for 10 years on a revised edition. He just died a couple years ago, actually less than that. Geodestinies, again, The Inevitable Control of Earth Resources Over Nations and Individuals. The revised edition should come out in late 2019. The fact that this is not considered Theology 101 is the reason that we are so fortunate to be learning this now. So ecology, energy, and history, it's really the fundamentals of reality. And we have to understand the difference between sustainable cultures and unsustainable cultures. That is, those that preserve their resource base and those religiously, and those that foul their resource base. The first 97 to 99% of human history, we lived more or less sustainably. And the 97 and 99% is depending upon where you start humans, whether Homo sapiens 400,000 years ago or Homo habilis 2.5 million years ago. The last 1 to 3% of human history, the most recent 8,000 years or so, 6,000 BCE to the present. And sustainable was all about stability and continuity. It was being faithful to time and faithful to nature. And I have those capitalized because they were personified mythically. These were related to as divine, as aspects of ultimate reality. And unsustainable, we see scores of booms and busts. That is, scores of times when progress was undeniable and scores of times when decline was undeniable. And relative stasis, more common than either one of them. So if you only remember one thing from this entire program, I invite you to remember this, that sustainable means accountable to the future and the past, and unsustainable means unaccountable to the future and the past. Here again, we have a visual image of over time. Again, we're talking about the first 97 to 99% of human history, 400,000 years more or less. This is 20,000 generations. And again, there were good times and bad times and droughts and famines and glaciers and everything else during this period of time. And so human well-being and the well-being of the bioregions went up and down together. But sustainable, always and only, means ecology is the queen of the sciences. It's the primary economy, that is, economics always mimics the rules and laws of ecology. And also the heart of theology. Ecology is the heart of theology in sustainable cultures, and anthropocentrism, or human-centeredness, is really seen as idolatry. And these books, The Stable Society by Teddy Goldsmith, Edward Goldsmith, and The Way, an Ecological Worldview, are classic. Teddy Goldsmith was the publisher and the editor for almost 40 years of The Ecologist magazine. And Richard Adrian Reese, What is Sustainable? Understanding Sustainability. He has actually one or two other books where he's reviewed, he's got these great reviews of 200 books that are the cream of the crop on true sustainability, deep sustainability, not shallow environmentalism. If you Google sustainable or sustainability or look at the Wikipedia page, you're going to get really confused because they start with civilization, which is practically the definition of unsustainability. Teddy Goldsmith and Rick Reese, you got to read them. Teddy Goldsmith speaks about religion, or in indigenous cultures, Lifeways, as the control mechanism of sustainable cultures. And I've been referring to them also as the coping mechanism of unsustainable cultures, that religion helps people cope with living in an unsustainable culture, which again is just a brief time in human history. Teddy Goldsmith says in The Way, in traditional, that is stable, sustainable, ProFuture societies, and this comes from his table of contents, technology is in accord with the needs of the biosphere. Settlements are in accord with the needs of the biosphere. The economy is in accord with the needs of the biosphere. Education is in accord with the needs of the biosphere, and community is in accord with the needs of the biosphere. And Teddy Goldsmith's writings, both The Stable Society and The Way, is based on like 400 years of anthropological research, all the evidence that we have of the difference between sustainable cultures, that is those that preserve their resource base, and those that foul or defile or destroy their resource base. Religion, it turns out, needs science, and evidence needs a moral voice, which can't happen when the biosphere is exploited as it, rather than honored as thou. In all civilizations are unsustainable, all city-based civilizations. And this is just the last 1 to 3% of human history. Roughly 8,000 years, we have over 100 civilizations that we know of, roughly 400 generations compared to 20,000 generations that lived sustainably. And this is the primary pattern. This is the overshoot pattern. We see the health and well-being of the habitat, that is the carrying capacity. There's a limit to how much can be taken in resources and a limit to how much waste can be exuded before the systems start breaking down. And the health and well-being of the biosphere is real wealth. And we see the well-being of the elites and the ruling classes. Wealth, what gets called wealth and progress, goes up. And when these cross, that's overshoot. And again, this is reality 101. We see this when we understand ecology, energy, and especially history. And that's why I so highly recommend these books. A Forced Journey by John Perlin, Geodestinies by Walter Youngquist. And if you only read one book again in your life, make it overshoot. Just in February 2019, the BBC came out with a Deep Civilization series. An article by Luke Kemp talked about, are we on the road to civilizational collapse? Well, he answers yes, and he takes a look at 88 ancient civilizations between 3000 BCE and 1000 of the Common Era. That's a 4,000-year period. So he doesn't go back beyond 3,000 years, and he doesn't look at the last 1,000 years. That's why it's actually over 100 civilizations have collapsed. And there are common elements. Climate and overshoot. Complexity. Turns out complexity is used to solve problems, but then complexity begins to create more problems than it solves. And the same is true of technology. Technology almost always, that is human-centered technology, that doesn't mimic the wisdom of nature's technology, that doesn't integrate with the living world's technology, almost always creates more problems over time than it solves. And then, of course, inequality, oligarchy, the growing gap between the rich and the poor. These are fundamental factors that cause collapse, as does external shock, wars, volcanoes, famines, plagues, and randomness, bad luck. Shit happens. The interesting thing, though, is that the first 3 of these are all caused by religious failure. The fundamental role of religion, again, through 97 to 99% of human history, was to ensure that the future is never compromised by the present. It's to ensure that the culture in all of its institutions is accountable to the future. I love these quotes. These are very potent quotes. Forests precede civilizations, and deserts follow them. All of our exalted technological progress, civilization for that matter, is comparable to an axe in the hand of a pathological criminal. The end of the human race will be that it will eventually die of civilization. The earth is littered with the ruins of empires and civilizations that once believed they were eternal. Now, how is it that Steven Pinker and the other techno-optimists don't get this? Well, it's because they're poster kids for cluelessness around ecology, energy, and history. They're really blinded by their own religion, the secular religion of perpetual progress. And yes, I know that Steven Pinker is an atheist. He attacks religion, understandably, and actually he does it quite well because the religion he's attacking is otherworldlyism. It's not sustainable religion. But he's also blinded by the secular religion of perpetual progress. Here's the creation story of the secular myth of perpetual progress. Stone Age, cavemen, savages, primitives, hunter-gatherers. Things really start picking up with the agricultural revolution. Farming, cities, civilization, 10,000 years ago. And then the Enlightenment, things really pick up. Reason, science, humanism, progress. And the reason I have exclamation points is because that's the way the prophets of progress speak about it. The Industrial Revolution. Notice the word revolution, agricultural revolution, industrial revolution, like it's a really positive thing. Yeah, it's positive for many humans, not even all humans. In fact, not even the majority of humans. Fossil fuels, technology, globalization, space travel. And then virtually all the techno-optimists have a Star Trek vision of the future. I call this the techno-idolatrous ecocidal myth of man, conqueror of nature, perhaps the most self-destructive thought form in human history. We're all familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that the basic needs of physiological needs are the most important: air, food, water, shelter, so on. Safety needs, then love and belonging needs, then esteem needs and self-actualization needs. And of course, what this means is that esteem and self-actualization are the most vulnerable because things that go wrong at more basic levels of the pyramid impact them. But all of these rest on the foundation of primary reality. That is, the health and well-being of every system upon which we depend. Climate, soil, forests, water, fresh water, oceans, plankton, pollinators, other animals, plants. So focusing first and foremost on the health and well-being of primary reality, everything we depend upon, is known as ecocentrism or life-centeredness. And the basic stance is one of humility, the sense that we belong to the land. Primary reality is primary. When we focus on human health and well-being first and foremost and take for granted primary reality, that's known as anthropocentrism or human-centeredness, and it's ultimately not sustainable. It's self-terminating. And the attitude is one of hubris, this idea of the land belonging to us. And I suggest that this is the fundamental meaning of idolatry. It's not bowing down to statues, and it's not believing in the wrong God. It's having a hubris or arrogant relationship to primary reality rather than a humble relationship to primary reality. So the question, how are we doing as a species? Are we progressing or are we collapsing? Well, a dear friend of mine, Tom Atlee, who's one of the leading experts in the world on collective intelligence, his website is cointelligence.org. He's been asking that question for a long time, and he says, when people ask him how he thinks we're doing as a species, he says, well, it seems to me things are getting better and better and worse, faster and faster. And of course, everybody laughs because it's true. But when you think a little more deeply about it, you realize that what's getting better and better are some things for some people. But what's getting worse and worse is everything that we depend upon. These systems are not just in decline, they're in free fall. So, Steven Pinker is absolutely right. Things are getting better and better for many human beings, and he writes brilliantly. He and the other techno-optimists are just excellent writers. They're leading intellectuals. What they're saying is true, but it's only half the story, and it's not the most important half. So Pinker has like 75 charts in his book, Enlightenment Now. He wrote another New York Times bestseller, The Better Angels of Our Nature, about how less violence, less crime, less prejudice. And it's true. You can show all kinds of measures, kind of like that picture before of, less violence among the golfers and better golf clubs and more golf courses and stuff like that. But what he's not paying attention to, well, actually, before I get there, he rightfully says that what's driving all of this goodness for humans, or for some humans, is technological progress and expansion and economic growth and development. What he fails to note is that technological progress and expansion and economic growth and development are causing things to get worse and worse for every single thing that we need. Overpopulation, overdevelopment, overshoot. And all the systems are in decline. Loss of soil organisms, soil nutrients, groundwater, glaciers, rapidly and significantly expanding deserts, deadly droughts, heat waves, hurricanes, flooding, ocean acidification and oceanic dead zones, plastic pollution, nuclear wastes, toxic air, water, soil, and then the catastrophic loss of insects. 75%. Just in the last year, we've seen these reports of the insect apocalypse, but all these other species as well that we depend upon. So we really need to call it what it is. This is caused by technological devastation and takeover and economic growth and destruction. And overshoot also causes climate change. Overshoot is the cause of all of these. See, none of these are the cause. Overshoot's the cause. These are just the symptoms, and climate change is making every one of these worse. This is a potent quote from Robert Louis Stevenson. Sooner or later, we all sit down to a banquet of consequences. That's the Great Reckoning. We are in the early stages of the Great Reckoning, not because some supernatural being is pissed off at us, but because there are consequences when we're living out of right relationship to reality. I believe it can also be the Great Homecoming. Humanity, the prodigal species. We're waking up to our predicament, in the pig pen as it were, and coming home to reality. I love this quote. Science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind. But I actually think that doesn't go nearly far enough. I say religion without science is idolatrous, and science without religion is ecocidal. Again, here are the main points. How we define and measure progress determines our behavior and what kind of a world we are leaving our grandchildren and other species. Hoping for perpetual progress via techno-fix solutions fosters complacency instead of responsible ProFuture actions. Problems caused by economic growth and development will not be solved by more of the same. Indeed, our predicament will worsen. And understanding ecology, energy, and history undermines expectations that human ingenuity, technology, or the market can save industrial civilization. So I have a course that's coming out on Earth Day 2019 called ProFuture Faith, The Prodigal Species Comes Home, where I go into great depth on all this stuff. It's 8 sessions, each 20 minutes long. It's a video discussion course promoted or published by Living the Questions. And there's 2 parts. Part 1, the first 4 sessions are about coming home to reality. And the next part, part 2, is practical wisdom. Here's a short, minute-long trailer.
We see that it's not religion or science. It's religion and science. Both are absolutely essential for the human endeavor. So this notion of ecology as the heart of theology, I call it eco-theism. It's not about believing in anything. Half of religion is gagged and tied in the trunk, and the other half of religion are in the back seat cheering on the psychopathic politicians that are driving us over the cliff. You've got thousands, maybe millions of people that are debating whether or not God exists or whether or not God is real, when the one real God, namely reality, personified or not, we've been living out of right relationship to, and we are now about to experience consequences of biblical proportion. I suggest this is the fundamental distinction of our time. Not liberal or conservative, left or right, communist, capitalist, none of that. The most important distinction is pro-future or anti-future. It's accountability to the future.
Thank you for watching. ProFutureFaith.org